I remember the winter of '78 and '79, not for the bitter cold, but for the sound. It was a sound that didn't belong to the quiet foothills of Cleveland County, North Carolina. A sound that crawled across the icy pine needles and slid under the seams of every tightly shut door. It was the sound of Knobby, and it changed everything we thought we knew about the wilderness right outside our window. My name is Dale Cole, and back then I was 16, the cautious shadow to my older brother, Curtis. Curtis was 18, a year out of high school, working odd jobs and convinced he was destined for greatness. He carried a cheap, beat-up Polaroid land camera everywhere, believing he was one good snapshot away from proving the impossible and escaping our small, suffocating town. We lived just north of Kings Mountain, close enough that the shadow of Carpenters Knob loomed over our back acreage like a silent, dark watchman. The reports of Knobby had started around late December 1978. At first they were just whispers in the general store, the kind of tall tales folks used to tell to scare the tourists. But by January and February 1979, the whispers had turned into a full-blown roar. The whole county was talking about it. The epicenter of the phenomenon was the store run by the Cooks, located right in the shadow of the knob. We didn't shop there often, but we went religiously during those months, just to soak up the atmosphere of shared terror. Ruby Cook, the daughter-in-law, a practical woman who usually only talked about fertilizer prices, would stand behind the counter, her voice low and steady. "People aren't just saying they saw it," she told a small crowd of local farmers one evening, her eyes wide with a conviction that chilled me to the bone. They have seen it. The stories were frantic, conflicting, and yet somehow they coalesced into a single monstrous image. They described a creature, supposedly 6 feet tall and around 200 pounds. It was dark, hairy, almost black, and possessed a disproportionately small head with a flat, almost featureless face. The debate about its gait was endless. One farmer, a grizzled old man named Mr. Hayes, who swore he'd seen everything the Carolina woods had to offer, insisted it walked on 4 legs, like a huge, primal ape, moving in great, bounding leaps. But just the next day, a young logger would swear on his wife's name that he saw it standing completely upright, like a man striding silently through the deep pine forest, its arms swinging too long and too low. The consensus settled on the name Knobby, derived from the mountain itself, which only added to the creature's eerie, proprietary feel. It belonged to that place. It was the knob. The scariest account, the one that kept me up at night, was that of Minnie Cook, the 88-year-old matriarch who was the first to go public. She saw the creature near her home in the waning days of 1978. According to the town gossip, the sighting terrified her so profoundly that she would not step outside her threshold without her trusty rifle clutched in her frail hands. That image, an ancient woman forced to arm herself against an ancient horror, was far more disturbing than any blurry print footprint. Curtis, naturally, was ecstatic. "Dale, this is our ticket out," he'd whisper, adjusting his camera bag. "A panther? A bear? No, we're talking about a genuine Sasquatch, right here in North Carolina. We find it, we photograph it, and we make history." I, on the other hand, felt a creeping dread. The woods that had always been our playground suddenly felt hostile and deep. We spent a week gathering every piece of anecdotal evidence we could. Our favorite source was Jim Hollingsworth, an investigator who had come all the way from Oregon, working for the North American Research Association. He had spent years tracking Sasquatch out west, and he was convinced the local accounts matched the phenomenon perfectly. Hollingsworth was most concerned with the sounds. He spent hours talking to people who had heard the lonesome cries in the night. He dismissed the theories of a bear or a mountain panther immediately. Their description surprised me, he told a newspaper reporter, a clipping of which Curtis taped to his bedroom wall. They describe it as a sound that varies in pitch from a low growl to a high scream, as being like a bull bellowing but with its own sound. They also say that after it screams for a few seconds, it has a yodeling-type sound. A yodeling scream. That was the detail that lodged itself permanently in my mind. It was an unnatural combination, a sound of raw, bestial terror ending in a bizarre, almost musical flourish. It spoke of intelligence, of something that wasn't just an animal, but an unknown creature that was both man and ape, as some experts suggested.
Then there was the physical evidence. Forrest Price of Cassar had found his goat dead, its neck broken, and he suspected Knobby. Later, an animal den and bizarre tracks were found about 2 miles from the Price homes. The searchers described the tracks as being as large as a man's hand, but with a strange, thumb-like protrusion. This confirmed for Curtis that it was not a bear, which leaves clear, non-protruding paw prints. Curtis decided the publicity surrounding the huge all-night search stunt orchestrated by a radio station in Shelby was useless. Amateurs with pickup trucks and boom boxes won't find anything, he scoffed. We need to go where the fear is fresh. Our target became the area near the Price homes, where the tracks and the den were found, a stretch of thick secondary growth known locally as the Dark Patch. It was the first week of March 1979. The ground was still cold and damp, the trees bare, offering only meager cover. Curtis and I set out late one Saturday afternoon, armed with a compass, a thermos of bad coffee, a hunting knife, Curtis's idea, thankfully, and the ubiquitous Polaroid camera. We follow the small streams that lead up to the knob, Curtis instructed, consulting a topographic map he'd swiped from the library. That's where the tracks were, near the runoff. The Dark Patch lived up to its name. The air was heavy, still, and smelled overwhelmingly of wet earth, decaying leaves, and a sharp, musky odor that made my eyes water, like a combination of stale sewage and wet dog. We moved slowly, focusing on the mud banks near the stream. After 2 hours, our diligence was rewarded. Near a cluster of granite boulders, where the runoff had softened the clay, we found a perfect, horrifying specimen. It was a footprint, undeniably huge, the size of a dinner plate. But it wasn't the size that stopped my heart. It was the thumb-like protrusion on the side, exactly as described. It looked like an elongated human handprint pressed into the earth, but grotesquely exaggerated and built for immense weight. The sight of that impossible print, a tangible mark of the creature's existence, turned the legend into raw reality. "Get the camera, Dale, quick!" Curtis hissed, fumbling in his bag. As Curtis frantically framed the picture, I felt a sudden, profound shift in the atmosphere. The musky scent intensified, stinging my nostrils. The little stream, which had been gurgling cheerfully, went absolutely silent. The woods held their breath. "Curtis, stop," I whispered, pulling on his sleeve. "It's near. I smell it." Curtis ignored me, struggling with the camera. The focusing wheel was sticky in the cold. Just as he was about to press the shutter, a low, guttural noise rumbled through the trees, not loud, but vibrating the ground through the soles of my worn boots. It was the low growl Hollingsworth had mentioned, a sound of immense power, like a bull bellowing, but with a deeply resonant, unsettling quality that felt entirely wrong. We froze. Curtis abandoned the camera, his bravado instantly evaporating. "Which direction?" I mouthed, my throat too tight to speak. He pointed, trembling, toward a thicket of scrub pine 100 feet away. We could see nothing, but the musky odor was now overwhelming, and the silence was suffocating. "We run, Dale," Curtis whispered, gripping the handle of his knife. But before we could move, the silence was shattered by the sound that would haunt my nightmares for the next 40 years. It began as a high-pitched, piercing scream, sharp enough to split the skull, exactly like the one described by the frightened locals, a wailing in the night like a woman in pain. It was an agonizing sound of pure, unadulterated distress. Then, just as the scream should have subsided, it changed. The high note transitioned into a bizarre, oscillating sound, dropping in pitch and then rising again in a terrifying primal yodel. It was a complex, intelligent sound, not random. It sounded like an animal calling out, mocking the very concept of silence. The fear was so complete, it felt like my blood was turning to ice. We didn't wait to see the source. We ran. We scrambled back toward the ridge, our only goal to put distance between us and that terrifying cry. The yodeling scream followed us, echoing and bouncing off the mountainside, making it impossible to tell how close the creature was. We burst onto the narrow ridge path. The light was fading fast, bleeding the colors out of the sky. And then it was there. Not running, not lunging, but simply standing in our path, maybe 30 yards away, near a massive, uprooted oak. It was every single terrifying description rolled into one. It was huge, easily 6 feet tall, perhaps a little more, and broad. Its bulk made the trees behind it look fragile. It was covered from foot to head in thick, matted dark fur, almost black against the gray evening light.
But what truly paralyzed me was its posture. It was standing upright, like a man, yet it moved with a subtle, shifting gait that was entirely non-human. Its arms were too long, its hands dangling below its knees, and its immense shoulders slumped forward in a gorilla-like slope. The small, flat head with the indiscernible features turned slowly toward us. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a panther. It was the Knobby of legend. It didn't move toward us. It simply stood there, blocking the path, observing us with an unnerving stillness. We could now see its eyes, two dark, reflective pools that seemed to absorb the last vestiges of daylight. "Don't move," Curtis whispered, his voice catching. He slowly, agonizingly slowly, raised his hand and pointed at the creature. "Look, Dale. Look at the legs." I forced my eyes downward, dragging my focus from the creature's face. It was standing on 2 legs, like a person, but the legs were bowed, heavily muscled, and the feet, the terrifying, enormous feet with the thumb-like protrusion, were slightly turned outward. It seemed poised, ready to drop onto all 4 limbs at any second, a terrifying blend of 2 worlds. And then I noticed the other thing, the thing that didn't fit the legend. Around the creature's chest and one shoulder, there were thin, almost invisible lines of silver wire, like metallic thread woven into its black fur. It was subtle, but in the fading light, the wire caught the glare of the sky. It wasn't natural. It looked like some kind of crude, metallic harness. Before I could breathe or form a thought, the creature lowered its head and gave a sound that was neither a scream nor a growl, but a simple, terrifying, heavy sigh, filled with a profound, aching grief. It was the most human sound it had made. And then it turned. It didn't run. It simply took 2 colossal strides toward the uprooted oak, and then, with astonishing speed and agility, dropped onto its knuckles and clambered up the side of the massive tree, the silver wire catching the last light before it disappeared into the higher branches, swallowed by the thickening shadows of the knob. We didn't stop running until we hit the asphalt road miles away from the base of the knob, long after the moon had risen. We never looked back. We got home late that night, exhausted and covered in mud. The The first thing Curtis did was dump his camera on the kitchen table and frantically develop the film. Every single photograph was either overexposed, blurry, or captured only the surrounding trees. The only clear image was the initial shot of the footprint, the damning evidence of the thumb-like protrusion.
We told our parents we got lost. We never told them what we saw. But in the days and weeks that followed, the local buzz about Knobby slowly began to fade. The all-night searches dwindled, and the TV station's special program moved on to other local oddities. The general consensus returned to the comfort of the rational. It was just an unusually large, injured black bear, perhaps. The cries were probably a hungry panther. D.H. Canopy's theory about the mountain panther gained traction. But Curtis and I knew the truth. We had seen the impossible thing standing upright, and we had heard the impossible yodeling scream. More importantly, we carried a secret, the silver wire. Curtis, analyzing the photographs of the footprints and the blurry background shots, theorized constantly. The size, the strength, the upright walk, that's the Sasquatch, he'd mutter, tapping the blurry photo with a pencil. But the wire, Dale, the harness, that means someone put it there. Knobby isn't a natural phenomenon, it's a captive. We realized the heartbreaking truth. Minnie Cook hadn't just seen a creature lurking near her house. She had seen a creature that was possibly escaping a clandestine laboratory or a private, illegal collection facility hidden deep within the mountain. Knobby wasn't the local boogeyman. He was an experiment gone wrong, an unknown animal desperately trying to survive and communicate its pain through that terrible, yodeling cry. The mystery wasn't about the existence of Bigfoot. It was about who owned him. We decided not to go public. Not because we were scared of the ridicule, but because we were scared of the wire. If someone was powerful or cruel enough to capture an animal like that and harness it, they were powerful enough to silence 2 teenage boys. We had our proof, the footprint, but we also had our life. We kept the photograph of the thumb track taped to the bottom of an old desk drawer. We never spoke of the silver wire, the yodeling scream, or the human sigh again. But every time the wind howled around the house, in the deepest dark of the night, I would listen intently, half expecting to hear that sound. The sound of Knobby, the captive beast of Carpenter's Knob, still waiting for someone to solve the real mystery of its sudden, terrifying appearance in the foothills of North Carolina in the cold winter of 1979. The knob remained silent, its secret buried deep in the earth, and the scream, though faded from memory, still echoes in the deepest parts of my soul.